Hi everybody. Okay, so today we are going to go over some of the things we learned and explored in class, including the parts of a story and how we're going to use those in the development of our comic books, as well as comic book layouts, thumbnails, character design, and making and using collages for backgrounds. Okay, so first we're going to start with the parts of the story. As you can see on the list I just showed you, we first talked about genre, which is basically the type of story you want to make. Are you making an adventure story, or a horror comic book story, or a drama, or a comedy? Okay, so that was where we started, and then we started to talk about characters, which I'm going to talk more in depth about that later on. The setting, we talked about that last week. And the main thing we focused on this week was the plot. So the plot consists of the beginning, the middle, and the end. We wrote about these in our practice sketchbooks, and I recommend doing some writing to develop that and to organize your story into those parts. So the beginning is an important place to set up your story. So you're going to need to describe your setting or share the setting with your viewer, as well as introduce your characters. And we can start to lay out what kind of story this is on that part. The middle is basically maybe the character is facing some sort of conflict. Whatever it is that your characters are up against or doing, that'll all be happening in the middle. So middle can be high action sometimes. And then the end. So perhaps the conflict gets resolved or doesn't. It's up to you, however you want to end your story. So that was how we started to organize our thoughts. Once you have your story organized, you know the characters, you know what it's about, you have your plot worked out, we can start thinking about how to translate the story into a comic book. So basically, how can we tell that story through pictures and drawings? So one of the things we discussed were comic layouts, which are, I'm going to show you a few examples right here. So as you can see, artists have all sorts of ways of organizing their images on a page. A few things to keep in mind that are going to help tell your comic book story. One, we can keep it varied. Okay, that'll help your viewer be able to understand different parts of the story, what is important. So you can do this by like changing the size. For example, if something is really important, maybe we want to give it an entire panel. If there's a progression, something happens really fast, we could take one of our pages and divide it maybe into 4 sections to show the sequence and the order. So this brings me to another important point when you're designing your layouts, which is the reading order. Okay, so when you're laying out your story in these panels, we want to make sure that the person reading the story knows the order, okay, so it doesn't become confusing. So just a few things to keep in mind while you're doing that. So one big suggestion I have to help you lay out is to create thumbnails. Okay, so here is an example of a thumbnail. What I am doing here is I've put 9 pages of my comic book inside my practice sketchbook. Thumbnails are light, they're kind of small, right? So instead of actually using a single page for each page in my comic book, I'm making a small version of it, so like a thumbnail size. Okay, and this is a way that you can start to think about how am I going to design my comic book layouts per page. Okay, so just think different versions to think about. Okay, so character is another thing we discussed. We created some character design sheets. This is a way to help you get to know your characters and develop their stories. Okay, so this, I'm going to show you an example. So something to keep in mind, one, we want to draw your character from different angles, right? So you really want to know what this creature character looks like in expressing maybe different emotions, different poses. The other thing, I find it helpful to make a list of characteristics that my character has. So what are they like? What's their personality like? What are some of their interests? Or even where are they from? Or where do they live? What are their hobbies and what is their favorite food? Those are a few of the things you can think about while you're developing your character, and you can just lay it all out on the character design sheet just like the one I showed you. The last technique that we explored in camp this week is using collage to create backgrounds that we can draw on top of. So a collage is a type of artwork that basically is made up of different images all laid out together, or different types of paper composed together. So in this case, we used some tissue paper and we layered it on top of each other like this. You can just rip it very easily, add some glue, and you can just lay the piece right on top like this. Okay, I was working on an underwater scene since my story takes place underwater. As you can see, you can layer the colors and you can still see some of what's underneath in that way. Once everything is dry, you can also go back in and draw on top of it. So that's what we were using our Sharpies for. You can also find different ways to use tissue paper. It's really great for sculpting. So maybe I can make the sea floor a little bit 3D. Okay. So this is just another technique that you can use in your comic book if it fits the way you want to make it. All right, thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next week to continue working on our comic books.